Well, thank you so much for joining me on Crypto World on set today. I'm so excited to hear about Yellow Card because, like I was saying off camera, I've been covering crypto for a while, and what you're doing at Yellow Card really seems like kind of the holy grail in one sense of what we can do with this technology. Take it from the beginning. What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
Yeah, I think the big thing that really made this clear to us was one day I was at a Wells Fargo, met this Nigerian man who was sending $200 to his family, and the bank charged him $90 to send $200. And I thought, that's crazy, right? So I talked to the guy, hey, have you heard of Bitcoin? It's free, it's instant, it's fun, all this great stuff. And went home and just started thinking, what would this guy's mom do with $200 in Bitcoin? You can't buy food with that, you can't pay rent with that. And to your point, everybody in this industry loves to talk about all the problems that we solve, right? I hear all the time about how we're revolutionizing finance and changing the way that payments work. But then all you actually see are NFTs of monkeys and meme coins and dog and cat coin and all of that. And so I think there was a big juxtaposition between sort of what the industry was saying and what was actually going on. And I just became obsessed with that problem. How does a real person with a real problem actually utilize this technology? And so that's what we set out to build, right? And essentially, what we developed is the technology for stablecoins to actually be used as an alternative to SWIFT and to correspondent banking, starting in countries where those systems don't work today.
So how did we get from Bitcoin to now stablecoins? You've built this business around stablecoins. When did you realize that it had to be around stablecoins versus Bitcoin? What made you realize that?
Yeah, so look, I love Bitcoin. I will be the first to say that. When we started off, we were only doing Bitcoin, right? We launched in June 2019. So, stablecoins were around, but they weren't certainly what they are today, right? And it wasn't until 2021 that we actually listed our first stablecoin, which was USDT. And within about a day of listing it, about 30% of our volume moved over to stablecoins. Within a few months, 99% of our volume moved over to stablecoins. Wow. And it just, completely took off from there. And so I think it became quite clear very quickly after, offering this as an option that, people are really just interested in the dollar, right? They're interested in payments. They're interested in, moving their money and better ways of being able to move money around the world rather than, speculating on Bitcoin or any of the other assets.
So tell me about the product itself. Who is using it and why? And how do you make money?
Corporates. We work with large corporates all over the world, right? All over emerging markets, Africa, other parts of the emerging world, and then companies across US, Europe, Asia, et cetera, that do business on the continent in emerging markets that need help with payments. We deal with large companies that have a lot of money in these countries, a lot of local currency that they're not able to move, right? They're not able to properly interact with the international financial system for a number of reasons, either lack of liquidity on the US dollar or just no connectivity to SWIFT, right, through local banking networks. Right. And so we work with these companies on essentially three things: international payments, treasury management, and just access to dollars. Right. At the end of the day, what I like to tell people is that pretty much all the companies that we work with, what they have in common is none of them really care about stablecoins. None of them care about blockchain. None of them care about the technology. They just have very practical, real-world problems that they need solved. And this is the best way to do it. This is the best technology and the first technology that truly solves the problem, as opposed to just sort of moving the problem around on the back end.
Give me a sense of how much reach you have. So your market is Africa. How much reach do you have, and how do you quantify that?
Yeah, so we work predominantly in Africa and then across various parts of the emerging world. We work with about 30,000 businesses of all shapes and sizes, right? So everything from large banks on the continent down to a guy that sells shoes on the side of the road that he's importing from China, and everybody in between. We do a lot of work with PayPal and Coinbase and other major institutions that want to do business in some of the fastest growing GDPs, middle class, consumer class in the world, but don't want to deal with the regulation, the licensing, compliance, banks that don't have online banking, right? Currencies that are inflating rapidly. And so we do a lot of work with these large corporates and some of the big names in remittance and payments and banking on just making it a lot easier for them to be able to interact with these countries, all from a US dollar stablecoin base.
Stablecoins, obviously a hot topic in this country. We are, hopefully going to be seeing the first official crypto legislation that's focused on stablecoins. One of the main issuers of USD-backed stablecoins filing to go public again. What do these conversations and these milestones here in the US mean globally and for your business specifically?
Yeah, it's been great. I think look, the saying, I know it's on the continent. I think other people say it as well, is, when the U.S. sneezes, the world catches a cold, right? And so, when you have an administration that is pushing the technology, and when you have more openness from a legislative perspective in the U.S. on this technology, you get a lot more interest from countries and governments all over the world. And so, we've talked to governments just within the past couple of months that are, essentially asking, hey, what am I missing? What have I not been understanding about this technology that this new administration in the U.S. is so interested in it and is pushing it and has it as such a top priority. And so there's just a lot more interest around the world, especially in emerging markets, in, how do we adopt this technology? How do we embrace it? How do we get companies building here, setting up here, and bring in the innovation, bring in the jobs, bring in the money that this industry is bringing to the U.S. and to other countries around the world.
Okay, final thing for me. If what people want is the dollar and what's useful is the dollar, and as someone who sounds like a Bitcoin enthusiast, what would you say is the value proposition today for Bitcoin?
Look, Bitcoin is and always will be digital gold. Right. I think that, Bitcoin is the savings mechanism for the internet and certainly, for this industry. Look, you've seen what the gold price has done, even just, the last couple of weeks. You've seen what, Bitcoin has done over the last couple of months. It's, a hedge and a protection against a lot of the volatility that you're otherwise seeing in the markets. I think, look, the dollar, regardless of what the dollar is doing, regardless of, if it's getting stronger, weaker, any of that, the dollar is still the world reserve currency, right? 80+% of, international trade payments are still made in the dollar. All of oil and things like that and commodities still run through the dollar. And so the dollar is still extremely important in global trade. And so, a better way of interacting with the dollar, a better way of moving the dollar around the world is critical. And this is why stablecoins have become so prominent, especially recently, is people are realizing this is just a much better way of enacting payments that we're already enacting today. I don't think that it how do you say, changes the way that people should perceive Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is still digital gold. It is, the currency of the internet, the currency of the future, all of that. And, look, if, for all this talk about, dollar supremacy and weakening and things like that, I don't think we're seeing it in practice in, especially in emerging markets. I don't think we're seeing it yet. But, look, if it were to happen, I think Bitcoin is, one of the only realistic contenders to actually take that spot. I don't think another government-backed currency could replace the dollar at this point in terms of, being the world reserve and world payment currency.